Right now, Europe is facing a gamble, a really high stakes one. An ultimatum from its closest ally is forcing a choice between economic stability and its own sovereignty, putting the entire US Europe relationship to a massive test. So let's break down what's happening. I mean, it sounds like something straight out of a political thriller, right? But this is a real ultimatum coming from the United States. And this completely unprecedented demand has sent shockwaves across the diplomatic world, putting European leaders in what feels like an impossible position. All right, Section 1, a shocking ultimatum. So what exactly is in this demand from the US? Let's get right into the specifics. Okay, so the demand is basically structured as a massive economic threat. We're talking about tariffs starting at 10% and quickly ramping up to 25% on 8 key European nations. But the truly wild part, the thing that makes this so unusual, is the condition to make it all go away. It all disappears only when the US gets a deal to buy Greenland. So yeah, this isn't a normal trade dispute. It's using economic force to get territory. Okay, so Section 2, Europe's calculated gamble. Now, when you're faced with a demand that aggressive, you'd probably expect a pretty forceful response, right? But instead, Europe has gone for something, well, surprisingly restrained, a strategy of patience. It's a real calculated gamble. So the playbook Europe is running with is called strategic patience, and the whole idea here is to kind of absorb the shock, to engage patiently and basically just keep things cool. The main goal isn't to win the fight, it's to avoid a complete breakdown of the relationship and preserve the alliance for the long term. And this quote really gets to the heart of what they were hoping for. European leaders really believed that if they could just ride out these storms, they could get back to some kind of stability and predictability. The problem is, this whole Greenland ultimatum, it's the biggest test this strategy has ever come up against. So, you might be asking, why bet on patience? Why not push back harder? Well, it really all boils down to one word: security. Europe is still heavily dependent on that American security umbrella. And with the war in Ukraine still raging, there is a very real fear that pushing back too hard could put vital military support at risk, support they just can't afford to lose right now. All right, Section 3, patience or passivity. And this is where the strategy starts to hit a really dangerous snag. Because how Europe's patience is being seen from the other side of the Atlantic, well, that's a whole different story. And honestly, this is the crux of the entire problem. What Europe sees as sophisticated, strategic patience, the current US administration appears to be reading as just plain weakness. It's a huge miscommunication where diplomatic restraint is being completely mistaken for a lack of resolve. The real danger then is that this whole strategy is actively backfiring. By trying to be accommodating, European leaders might be accidentally signaling that they can be pushed around. And that doesn't lead to partnership. It just invites more pressure and even more aggressive demands down the line. Okay, let's zoom out a bit. Section 4, the autonomy dilemma. Because this crisis, it isn't just happening in a vacuum. It's actually shining a spotlight on a much deeper, more structural problem at the very heart of Europe's situation today. And that problem is a lack of what's called strategic autonomy. Basically, it's the ability for Europe to stand on its own 2 feet, to defend its own interests without having to depend on another power. It's something Europe has talked about for a long time, but as this situation makes painfully clear, it's something they haven't really achieved. So why the gap? Well, this didn't happen overnight. We're talking about decades of underinvesting in defense, combined with economic ties that create dependencies. It has all left Europe without the real muscle to back up its diplomatic talk. You could say it's become structurally dependent on American goodwill. So, Section 5, what's really at stake? And this brings us to what might be the most critical point of all, because the real danger here isn't just about some tariffs or even about Greenland itself. It's about the precedent, a really dangerous one, that this whole situation could set for the future. Let's just look at the playbook that's being written right now. Step 1, it suggests that using economic punishment to make territorial demands, well, it works. Step 2, it signals that Europe's so-called red lines are actually pretty negotiable. And that leads to a final, really alarming conclusion, that European sovereignty itself can become just another bargaining chip on the table. And the irony here is just, wow. For years now, Europe's support for Ukraine has been all about defending territorial integrity, right? About defending a rules-based world where you can't just change borders by force. And yet, when a territorial demand comes from its biggest ally, the response has been, well,
Crickets. It's been so quiet, you'd barely know it was happening. This massive inconsistency really undermines the very principles that Europe says it's defending everywhere else.
And this is why this moment is just so incredibly critical. As one commentator warned, if Europe can't find the resolve to draw a line in the sand right here, the demands are not going to stop at Greenland. This is a fundamental test of its ability to defend its own interests.
All right, Section 6, learning to say no. So this all brings us to one fundamental point, a choice about the future that Europe is facing right now. When you boil it all down, the road ahead really splits in two. Is this alliance going to be a real partnership, based on mutual interests and respect? Or is it going to become a hierarchy, defined by dependency, where one side just calls all the shots? And look, learning to say no isn't about trying to start a fight or being hostile. It's really just about self-respect. It's about having some strategic clarity and drawing clear lines in the sand about what's negotiable and what just isn't. Which leaves us with this final big question. For an alliance to be a real partnership, don't both sides have to be able to say no? That's the fundamental question Europe has to answer for itself.